Good morning and welcome to Saturday morning, the 29th of January. Today's devotion from Michael Card is You Walk in Lonely Places. The lyrics for this are co-written with Sarah Hart. When they told you of the Baptist, of what Herod's men had done, you fled into the wilderness. You fled to be alone, and you grieved the world's cruelty. You knew in flesh and bone the heartache of mistreated and the sorrow of alone. Lord, you walked in lonely places. Oh, you felt our emptiness. Lord, you walked in lonely places to know the pain of man. In Gethsemane, you struggled just to make it through the night, and you called on those who loved you but weren't ready for the fight. And you pleaded as they slumbered on. You knew in breath and blood the heartache of abandoned and the suffering of one. And in my darkest hours, I call upon your name, O Lord, and you come into the solitude of what I cannot face alone, because you walk in lonely places. Oh, you felt my emptiness. Lord, you walk in lonely places to know the pain of man. We have only the slightest hint of the loneliness of Jesus in Mark 6:31. I probably should have mentioned those passages to you, Mark 6:31 as well as 14:32 to 42. We have only the slightest hint of the loneliness of Jesus in Mark 6:31. Upon hearing of the death of his cousin John, he takes the disciples into the wilderness for what ostensibly is a retreat. Come with me, he says to them. Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. So they had been so overwhelmed by the crowd that they hadn't even had a chance to eat. The disciples had been out on their first mission and would no doubt have been exhausted. Away from the crowd, apparently Jesus would have a chance to mourn the death of his cousin while the 12 might have a chance to recover. But in the end, it didn't work out that way. Once again, the crowd saw them depart by boat and simply followed along the shoreline, getting there ahead of Jesus. His mourning, M-O-U-R-N, his mourning would have to wait for another time. His emotional needs would be subsumed by their hunger for bread. The other gospel scene of Jesus' loneliness is, of course, Gethsemane. He does not really want to be alone. In fact, he asks Peter, James, and John to stay close by. He pleads with them to keep watch while he prays. They will, all of them, fall asleep at their post. Not once, but 3 times. Jesus' loneliness in the garden is a result of his closest friend's failure to be there for him. Out of a lengthy time of prayer, Mark only gives us 2 lines. Abba, you can do anything. Please take this cup of suffering away. But not my will, but yours be done. Luke speaks of Jesus' sweat becoming blood and of his anguish in the garden. Mark lets us know that it was not the failed sleeping lookouts who saw the arresting soldiers coming. It was Jesus who saw them. In verse 42, Jesus tells the sleepy disciples, look, here comes my betrayer. Isaiah prophesied the lonely suffering of the Messiah. In Isaiah 53, he foretold that the Messiah would be a man of sorrows, a man who struggled with senseless death, with the abandonment of his friends, and perhaps most of all, with the silence of God. Going back to the lyrics, I'll make my own lyric note because I could read something here you couldn't see. When he says, you knew in flesh and bone the heartache of mistreated, he puts that word in quotes, and the sorrow of alone. Later on, you knew in breath and blood the heartache of abandoned, and that word's in quotes, and the suffering of one, and that word is in quotes. So the four words are mistreated, alone, abandoned, one. Jesus went through all of that. Jesus understood all of that. And that's key for me. I don't know about for you. It's key that for me that Jesus understands the feeling of being mistreated. He understands the sense of being alone, even though surrounded by others who followed him. He, like us often do, felt alone. He felt the heartache, not just being alone, but abandoned. And he felt the suffering of one. One is the loneliest number, says the group Chicago from back in the day. And Jesus understands it. Jesus knows it. I don't know about you, but it's a blessing to me. It brings to life that passage in Hebrews that he understands our weaknesses. He understands our weaknesses. He understands all that we go through. And that's a blessing to me. I too often forget it. Get on a pity party. Maybe you do too. But what a blessing today to read this and to be reminded. He knows. He knows. Blessings to you today. Let's train our minds and hearts to remember this when we're feeling alone, when we're feeling abandoned, when we're feeling as though no one understands what we're going through. To be reminded that he walked in lonely places. He needed time to grieve, and yet it wasn't given to him. Those closest to him often let him down. He is a high priest who sympathizes with us, and he loves us. Blessings to you today. Make sure that tomorrow you spend time worshiping the Lord. Maybe you can't do it with a fellowship of people, but you need to do it even in a quiet time alone, of listening to him, of asking that question that we looked at yesterday, who are you? Or the day before, maybe that was. And get to know him better. In a time of worship, blessings to you today.